Okay, Morai Rabosai, tonight is November 9th, the 84th anniversary of Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht was the night which really manifested what was only alluded to in Hitler's plans against our people. And the first message I got as to what the reaction is going to be this year came from my dear friends in Harnof. And then I'm very proud to say my shul sent out a message. And the reaction, in case you haven't seen it, to darkness is light. Because shuls in Germany put out their lights. It didn't stop 1,400 of them from being burned to the ground and destroyed. So what we are doing today, as the shul said, 84 years ago today, November 9th, 1938, was Kristallnacht. Over 1,400 shuls were attacked and ransacked. The center of Jewish life from time immemorial, the synagogue, remained dark. In commemoration of that terrible time in Jewish history, we will be keeping our lights on at the Young Israel of Lawrence Cedarhurst on the night of November 9th, 2022, along with hundreds of other Jewish institutions around the world. I saw the eloquent request of a survivor who is nearing 100 years old, spoke beautifully. And he asked that we turn the lights on in our homes, take pictures of them, so people will see. It's almost like we're lighting up a Hanukkah. Anyway, it's a night that must be noted. So,
can't do it. I got lights.
In any event, we will
Hey, it's lit up.
Bring the light of Torah in tonight. Perek Lamed. Perek Lamed is the second installment of 4 dealing with Mitzrayim. Now, the Navi is at the behest of the Rebbeinu Shalom delivering a message. If there wasn't what to say, even though in this Navi there's a great deal of perseveration from the Rebbeinu Shalom, he talks a lot and repeats himself a lot in 24 prakim about his tremendous, justifiable anger with Klal Yisrael. It's done with us. Beis HaMikdash was burnt, was sent into Golus. And part of that Golus, which came years earlier, is in Bavel. So then he turned in Perek Chav Hey to Umos HaOlam, dealt with them, as we mentioned last week, some of them in short order. We had the mysterious or not so mysterious lengthy treatment of Tsar, Tyre, Phoenicia. And we're because it was wishy-washy and it gloated about us. Mitzrayim, we know what they did to us. And now we're going to find out what we do to them. But we dealt with them last week. So I will tell you that this week is different from last week. And next week will be different from this week. Last week, we had a little bit of Egyptology. We dealt with the crocodile, it was Paro. We dealt with the other fish who joined them in the water and held on to his scales, went down with him, went up with him, went on dry land with him, which is not a good thing for anything which is an amphibian or a water-dwelling creature. And we separated the punishments of Mitzrayim and Paro because they had 2 different deities. We said that last week. So this week, what are we going to do? This week, I can tell you the plot line of this week, a couple of sentences. Details of destruction and the destroyer. Details of destruction. The Nile will dry up. There'll be a fire throughout the land. They'll be overtaken. Their ruler will be decimated. They'll be sent into Golus. Sound like anybody we know being sent into Golus? I would say that it does. And then, after that, we're going to talk about, we identify that Nebuchadnezzar is the instrument of God in doing this. We'll also discuss a little bit later why Nebuchadnezzar was given this specific mission. Why him? And We're going to talk about Nebuchadnezzar, and we're going to talk about Paro. We're going to talk about how Nebuchadnezzar is strengthened and how Paro is destroyed. And then they'll be sent into exile, with the exception, as we said in Paragraph Tes Pasuk Tes Vav, there'll be a small, subservient, lowly remnant that will exist. That's the plot line. But what are we doing? I'm telling you right now, I feel at my lowest as a person who's giving a shiur, because it is really impossible to do justice. I spent my time to do justice to the amount of things being said. I took them, I underlined them, I highlighted them, I wrote them down. And then when I went to recall it, I can't keep it all in my brain. It's too much stuff. I do the best I can. So first things first. Details of destruction and destroyer. Yom Hashem al Mitzrayim. It'll be identified what Yom Hashem really is. And we'll give you a couple of brief introductions. Tova Gansel says that this prophecy is a prophecy that's not dated. The only one in the series of prophecies about Mitzrayim that doesn't have a date on it. Now, she posits, and you can accept or reject, that it conveys the message that it transcends time. You like it, you don't like it. Yeah, I don't care for it too much. Thereafter, the prophecy describes the inhabitants dying by the sword, the Nile drying up, Egypt with all its cities being left desolate, burned. The description of destruction of Egypt is emphasized for a group of 12 verbs comprising the message to these 6 psukim. Destroy, put an end to, be no more, desolate, set fire to, work judgments, shvatim, pour out fury, chema, cut off, be convulsed, readily breached, fall by the sword, and break. That's a lot. 6 psukim. Then, different elements emphasized in the descriptions in various prophecies fall of Egypt. First, military defeat. Our parak is all about the military defeat. It's depicted as the breaking of the arm. What's the arm? The zroa. What's the zroa for us? Zroa netuya, what God extends to us. But we're not talking about Hashem's arm, even though we really are. We're talking about the arm of Nebuchadnezzar and the arms, plural, forearms of Paro. The forearm of Nebuchadnezzar is strengthened by the Rebbeinu Shalom, and the forearms of Paro, Paros, are broken. And afterwards, there's the loss of its status, the end of its pride. And the next parak is, gonna wait for Moshe to get on since we began already. And the descent into Sheol. That's next week. Sheol is a word that brings trepidation to all of us. That's a very short introduction, kind of like a top of the, skimming the top. Sansino's introduction says, the imminent fall of Egypt. Egypt, the world power, center of pagan worship, is to lose both attributes. Her collapse will be a blow to heathendom in general and a demonstration of the sovereignty of Rebbeinu Shalom. All her allies and dependent states will share her fate. Dependent states. Samach, lean upon, depend upon. It's a word we're going to use. Nebuchadnezzar is to be used as the agent for the execution of Hashem's will, and the destruction of the population and land will be extensive and thorough. Now, Das Mikra in Hebrew, it's a real nice job. So I would like to read what he had to say. He titles this Yom Hashem al Mitzrayim. And Yom Hashem, if you see Pasuk Gimel, Ki Karov Yom, the Karov Yom Hashem. Why we say Karov Yom, the Karov Yom Hashem? The Mari Cross says this is not happening in 2 years. It's happening within the calendar year, which is also the year of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So what states over here, which is my original question, he says, Achidush Sheba hu Peirut al Arei Mitzrayim. We're going to go through a list of cities. And if you want to see what the cities are, short bio, look in the Steinsaltz Hebrew Navi or the Steinsaltz New English Naviim, and he goes through a whole list of who these cities were. It's more than we can accomplish in this year. It says, Shelo yihiyeh shum makom shemaleit b'gzeres hachurban. Nobody escapes. Lo b'mkomot hapulchan le'elilei Mitzrayim. We wouldn't think. He says, the places of idol worship, they're not going to escape. Lo arei hamitzar, the fortified cities, they're not going to escape. That are on the borders. What do the borders do? Fortified cities on the border defend it. If they're not going to escape, they'll hope for the interior. He says, Gam kochos hateva, the forces of nature. What's nature? Nature is God. Yifalu lahachoshas hachurban, to endarken the churban. Choshech is another term repeated. Ulahashlamaso, and to complete it. That's what he says. And he says it extraordinarily well. Now, the structure, it can be as simple as breaking it into 2 parts. Psukim Aleph through Yud Tes, he says, Egypt's fate. And Psukim Chaf through Chavav, destruction by Nebuchadnezzar. Can break it down a little bit more. I used a sefer, which I don't use fairly often, which is Hartum's Nevi'im, because he does a real good introduction to the breakdown. He says, Perek Aleph, Perek Lamed, Aleph through Hey, Vav through Tes, Yud through Beis, Mitzrayim, Betom Chel, remember that word, Yiplu, Mitzrayim, and either those who support it or are supported by it will fall. Psukim Yud Gimel through Tes, Hashem Yishpoch, Shfoch Chamascha al Hagoyim. The parallels and the resonance of Yitzias Mitzrayim is unmistakable. Al kol chelkei eretz Mitzrayim v'al elileha, all over the land, all over its idols. And finally, Chaf through Chavav, Hashem yechazek es melech Gavel v'yishbor es koach Mitzrayim. God will strengthen the Nebuchadnezzar. God will break, Yishbor, break koach Mitzrayim. HaMitzrim yoglu me'atzam. They will be sent into exile. Strangely, this parallels what happens to us in the exact same time frame. Of course, the Yidden in Bavel are a precursor to all this. They were in Golos, but they were in good Golos. The Golos that happens later on, not quite the same. So let's look at what's going on. If we look at the Psukim, we take a look where it says in Pasuk Beis, Helilu ha layom. If you guys remember the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, it talks about 2 types of kolos on the shofar. One was yelalos and one was yevavos. Yelalos are wails, vavos are groans. And an expert shofar blower, which I am not, knows how to make the distinction in those kolos. So he says, Helilu ha layom. He says, wail on this day. And says Rabbi Eliezer Mebal Gonse, he says, Goyim should be wailing on this day. And the Mincha Gedola does a terrific job of of summarizing the Abarbanel, which he often does before he introduces his own thoughts. I generally read his own thoughts. He says, Leonidas Daiti. I'll be honest with you. I started to read it, didn't grab me, so I'm not going to tell you what I wasn't totally in love with. But let me tell you what the Abarbanel says. He says, if you're following in the Mikros Gedolos on page 489, in the Mincha Gedolah, the second paragraph, he says, Hine Hanavi Yechezkel Nibei, says, Beparshiyos ha'ela shishpirashti al Churban Mitzrayim. He says, Umiyad Ba'al, he says, he's talking about what happens in Mitzrayim. Umiyad, immediately, Ba'al lo nevuah acheres. He just finished, he's getting another nevuah. Mimasha asid shetecharev Mitzrayim Churban acher. No, not this one. Not the one we're talking about now. It says another one is coming. He says, Yoser Muflag, more extreme. Mimasha asa Nebuchadnezzar. Basically, he says, Ritzon Lomar, on page 491, HaChurban hazeh shenibesi al Mitzrayim b'mei Nebuchadnezzar, ke'efes v'tohu, it's nothing. Techoshev lo be'erech al Churban acher shetiel Mitzrayim. Nothing compared to what the Rebbeinu Shalom has in store. He says, Achar kach b'yom Hashem gadol v'norah. And I hadn't seen this before. You know what that day is? That day is Kibbutz Golios, the ingathering of the nations. I wonder if you guys remember, the guys who've been with me for a while. There's a scene I will never forget. We, the dead we of our ancestors, are in a courtroom. And we're witnesses. And in the defendant's dock, what's the word for it? Consecutively, every nation, every person who ever touched us in a negative way. And the Rebbeinu Shalom says, if you're dead, I will drag you out to destroy you again. It's incredible. That's what Kibbutz Golios is. That's the destruction that he's talking about. And he says, it's as though he's saying, Al talilu al churban hazeh, you're wailing about this? What does that remind you of? Remind you of Am Yisrael and Mitzrayim. He says, who complained and cried about the terrible fate of going to Eretz Yisrael based upon that testimony of Meraglim. He says, you're crying about this? Oh, I'll give you something to cry about. When Hashem says, I'll give you something to cry about, Hashem gives you something to cry about. And he says, Becherev yipolu. He says, Ha'umos ha'hema, Rubam lo zecharam Yirmiyahu b'parsha kos yayin ha'chema. We learned in Yirmiyahu that the bitter cup of retribution will be drunk by the nations of the world. Ki lo haya ela bichlal haratzot shetachriv Nebuchadnezzar. That I even counted what Nebuchadnezzar did. Elohim asidim licharev lo asid lavo, as we explained. Now, interest, first time, v'naflu somche Mitzrayim. What's l'smoch mean? L'smoch means to rely on. We talk about smicha as an integral part of a carbon. You have to put your hands, not just your hands, but all your weight on that carbon. It's a transference. We'd call that, I guess, in psychological terms. He says, and also means to be supported by. He says, which means uliozro. Make no mistake about it. Those are going to come to the assistant Mitzrayim. Yiplugam heim. Mehem chalolim harbe. They will fall from all of this. Now, in Pasuk Gimel, he says Yom Karov. The Mahari Krok says this year, not in the future. And he says there was an interesting word in Pasuk Daled. Now you guys all know the derech is I'm not going through every single pasuk. I'm going through interesting psukim, things that intrigue me, which I feel that it would be difficult to understand without learning this. There's a word. It says the word is chal chala. Ba'a charav Mitzrayim. The sword will come. Now remember, we talked about the parallel punishments to us in the siege by Nebuchadnezzar. Charav, dever, ra'ov. That's the three-pronged attack. So here, charav. And we find out the other pieces go along with it. It says, chal chala. If you look at Metzudas Tzion, he says, chal chala, says, reses re'adah. It says, wrath and trembling. Now, but he talks about that Kush. Kush is Ethiopia. Kush is neighboring Mitzrayim. Binafol chalol b'Mitzrayim. No, when people die in Mitzrayim, Kush sees Hashem is coming for them next through the Nebuchadnezzar, of course. And Pasuk Hey should ring a bell to you, because we just read about it in Bereshis. It says, Kush, Put, the Lud, the Kol Ha'ereth, the Chuv, B'nei Eretz Habris, Itam B'cherev Yipolu. Why should it ring a bell? Because what we're talking about says the Malbim, Kulam Mibnei Cham, the Mitzrayim. Remember, Cham was cursed. Maybe this is part of the curse. They are cursed, and they will fall with Mitzrayim, he says, quoting Bereshis, B'nei Cham Kusha Mitzrayim will put Mitzrayim Yolad as Ludim, Kulam Yiplu B'cherev in Mitzrayim. He says, all of them are going down with Mitzrayim. And the word that he mentions, V'chol ha'areth, he says, ha'ereth, I should say. Eisenman does a great job. Eisenman says, Moshe, I'm not Eisenman. Pardon me, I'm not in the first name basis with Moshe Eisenman. He says that Erev, he says, Erev Rav. What is Erev Rav? And he takes Erev Rav, he translates it, Kush, Put, Lud, all the motley people. Says, from Erev Rav. He says it refers to the various people who were clustered around Egypt and saw the land as their protector. They were somech on Mitzrayim, or they're trying to be lismoch bin Mitzrayim, trying to support her. But Rashi quotes Targum. Targum says, what is it? He says the word orev. Orev is a guarantor. As my Daf Yomi Rebbe once said, know what orev is? He says it's a moron with a pen. A person who signs to somebody else and guarantees it is an idiot who's holding a pen. You don't guarantee anything. But Hashem over here, he says, an orev co-signs on a loan, a pledge or a guarantee. So they were co-signers to Mitzrayim. Very dumb, very, very dumb.
Brian, can I just add something a little?
Please.
I always like the poetry that's involved. So if you look at Pasuk Bet, you have the, what would you say, alliteration, Helilu Halayom. That's it just runs one to the next. And the next Pasuk Daled, he does something similar. Haytach Chal Chala B'kush bin Pol Chalal. So he's enjoying the kind of rolling his words.
That is really what we're learning. You know, we talked about this. How much latitude does Navi have? The latitude we're told that a Navi has is how to express without exaggerating or without adding to Hashem's prophecy. And this is the poetry of Yechezkel. which, as David very rightly says, is poetic, beautifully poetic. Now, if you take a look at Pasuk, he says, Vav, Somche Mitzrayim, he says, the Yarad Gaon Uzah, it's pride and its might, Migdol Sineve, Acherev Yuplu Bon Hashem Elokim. And on that says the Mahari Krah. By the way, I keep calling Mahari Krah, it's Mahari Karo. When I gave you the biography, this was done by not Yosef Karo. I don't remember which one it was, but it's from the Karo Mishpacha. But he says, we would call it in the Gemara, Chesuri Mechsarav Ahachitani. He says, this is not a full pasuk. He says, Kitzurei Mikra Osu. No, he really shortened the right words. Shohaya lo lomar mi migdal seneve ad givul kush, the kush bichlal. Not just there, because what was Sineve? Sineve was a border. Kush was another border, going from one border to the other. He says, Elo lamisha amar lamala. This was stated in Parakhov Tes Pasuk Yud. It says, quote, Leharvos chorev shmama b'migdol Sineve agvul kush. So he enlightens us on that. Now, on the word Somche Mitzrayim, the Otzar HaMidrashim brings a great medrash from from Esther Rabbah, and I'll just read you the pertinent parts. Somche, he says, actually this one is from Vayikra Rabbah. Ein heim nismachim ala tzadikim v'ha'amuna b'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, what do Goyim do? Who do they depend upon? They depend upon each other. They don't look to the Rebbeinu Shalom. He says, Shenemar v'samchu somchei Mitzrayim v'naflu, and they will fall. Those who depend upon Mitzrayim, those who try to support Mitzrayim, Shem samchu, depended upon, or to give you a real linguistic parallel. We do smicha as a component part of a carbon. He says, Heim samchu al alilehem, except they weren't literally doing smicha, but they depended upon them. Remez al sharumos, that's what they do. But Avol Yisrael says, Shenismachim al ziknehem, v'tzadikehem, yesh lahem somchem shedemar, vayikra, v'samchu ziknei ha'edah. Who knows what we're talking about? Samchu ziknei ha'edah, vayikra. Seir,
right. Azazel.
Seir la'azazel.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We depend upon that transference. We depend upon our Zakenu to do it for us. That's a proper slicha, not what the Goyim do. So we go on. And if you look at, that was Pasuk Zion has a one word that stands out, the Noshamu. And they will be desolate. Betoch aratzos nishamos. They'll be desolate in desolate lands. The Orav, its cities, betoch orim nacharavos tehiyena. They will be destruction within destruction. Nobody can write a punishment like their Rebbeinu Shalom. And he says, V'yadu ki ani Hashem b'siti eish b'Mitzrayim v'nishmeru kol ozreha. V'yadu ki ani Hashem. Says the Malbim on this. He says, Shayidei ha'eish, the fire, that'll set Mitzrayim virtually on fire. Says, and by the way, fire, barad, flaming hail, makos, it's like the makos are being revisited. So he says, Yishbaru will break kol ozrel. Who are the ozrel? We said those are the ones who depend upon her or want to support her. There are three reasons why, says the Malbim. First, Kadesh lo yihye leMitzrayim somech machzik. We don't want him to have any help, any support. 2, sheyeh gam ha'aretz shesevivav nishama. He says the land around it has to be desolate too. Third reason is what we began with. Kadesh Yedei Hashem. Everything in our existence is for the glorification of the Rebbeinu. Make no mistake about it. That's our place in his world. Now, in Pasuk Ches, you take a look about 2/3, Pasuk Tes, Yetzu malachim milfonai batziyim. And Rabbi Eliezer, batzim, I take it. Rabbi Eliezer tells us batzim, he says sfinos, in boats. Malachim, sailors. Why? He says Lafisha Naharos Makifos Lakush. Kush is inland surrounded by water, and that's how you get to it.
Sim is the name of the former Israeli shipping industry.
Zim.
Right.
And Sim. Excellent. I didn't think of that. That's great. I once was on a Zim Lines cruise on my trip to Israel back when I was a junior in college. It's a glorious 3 days. Okay, the sun was amazing. Okay, so that's Zim. Thank you, David. So we're looking at destruction. We're looking at allies being brought down. That's really the prophecy. That's really what's going on over here. Now, the Mari Kra says about this, he says that he just says again, they were surrounded by water. Okay, and Cush is surrounded by water. Very good. So now we go on to part 2. We have to identify who the destroyer is.
Cush is what
Who's the
country?
destroyer? Nebuchadnezzar,
Cush is what country?
Ethiopia.
And it's surrounded by water?
As I look this, I really wish, and I apologize to you, I should have had a really good map. And I would bet that David Cohen will send a really good map, or Moshe Yeager will send a really good map of Mitzrayim showing you the position of Cush, where it is, if it's waterlocked, if it's not, maybe it was waterlocked then. You know, it's interesting, in Mincha L'Marav today, Rabbi Schreier was saying that we're talking about Shrotzim. He says that the Torah says procreate. And he says, science today tells us otherwise. How to resolve it? He says, Rab Dessler says we have our head screwed on backwards. He says the Torah's got it right. He says the scientists don't exactly have it right. So, you know, maybe the Ethiopia that we're dealing with is not the Ethiopia that they dealt with in those times. I don't know. I'll be perfectly
Hodu at
honest.
Kush in Megillah Esther, by the way.
Sure,
Hodu at Kush.
India
And there are
to Ethiopia. That
And
was-
I'm not an expert on the ancient world map, but geography. In any case, there's 2 pshatim there, if I recall. Hodu, they were contiguous next to each other, so it's so easy for them to rule over 127, or they really were opposite extremes, at opposite ends. So it's worth looking up at a map of that era. I don't know, whoever has quick access.
Or like you said, they were contiguous.
But
and
either
went around
contiguous
from one to
or
the other.
extreme 180 degrees apart.
Right.
Right.
So, says in Pasuk Yud, second section.
What are the early
the
numbers?
story-
Yeshua should have a map, an early map.
If you find one, and if you could scan it, email, send it around, so I'd appreciate it. I would like to see it. So he says, Pasuk Yud, Kom Hashem, and Hashem Elokim, Rachamim and Din. It's an interesting take on the Rachamim and Din in this thing, which we'll get to. The Hishbati es Hamon Mitzrayim biyad Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel. He's back. And he says, the Hishbati. That word got me. Hishbati. What does Hishbati mean? He says, if you look in Mitzudas Tzion, there's a word that is so fresh and current, it will blow your socks off. Hishbati He says, Inyan bitul. What's bitul mean in English? Anybody? Levatel.
Yeah, bittul chametz or tashbisu.
Void, void.
Void. I'm going to give you another word for it. Oh, Naomi, you'll send me the map. Naomi's got a great map.
Yeah.
Naomi, my wife, has a great map. We'll send it along. I don't have the time to study it now. But another word for bitul, nullify, void, is cancel. I like that word here.
Very good.
Hashem will cancel them. Hishpati. Whoa. Cancel them. Hamon Mitzrayim. Biyad Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. That got me. Okay. And go further. He says, and what's the punishment? What's the punishment? Pasuk Yud Bet. Well, firstly, Yud Aleph. It says the word the Amhu, Yamo, Ito, Oritzei Goyim. I say strong Bulvan Goyim will accompany him. Muvaim. Well, look at the diktuk, David. What verbal form is muvaim? Is it piel?
Pua.
Pual. Muvaim,
Pual.
I should have known. It's pual. It
Think
means
so.
will be brought. They will be brought. By who? By Hashem. And this is their instruments. Make no mistake about it. L'shaches ha'aretz. He says, the hiriku charbo sam. What does that mean? The scabbards will be empty because the swords will be drawn. We have something like that in talking about the churban, about the enemy scabbards being drawn. We have that churban b'nei Israel, but many parallels like that. So what's the punishment? Pasuk Yud Beis. V'nasati ye'orim charava. The rivers will, what river? The Nile will be dried up. Charava, what did God create? Yabasha asher b'charava. Bereshis, we know that. God created a firmament. That's what Hashem is going to make of their Nile River, their God. He says, Umacharti is ha'aretz biyad ra'im. Biyad ra'im. Bahashimosi, I will desolate the land. Eretz umloa, everything in it. Biyad zorim. Ra'im, zorim. Macharti. What's going on over here? Well, I believe that in that pasuk, the Malbim put it together very well. He says on page 495, if you have the Hebrew art scroll, Sheyiteno som charava ki im karas ha'aretz biyad ra'im, vehem lo yishmeru, these bad people, these bad foreigners, l'takein es haya'orim. Are they going to care about the chafirot sheyu min haya'or hagadol shebe'emtza ha'aretz? All the what is the word for it? All the pipelines that came to irrigate the land. They going to care? L'kol chelkei Medina, they went everywhere. Yecharava, ya'aretz timocher lahem. Timocher lahem. What does that mean? The Zarim Yishomu es ha'aretz says b'makom sheyesh adayin yishuv. He says, if there's anything left, we'll turn that into desolation as well. But I saw a fantastic medrash brought down, and this is a medrash, I'm only going to read you the relevant part from Esther Rabbah. We come back to Esther again. It says, the pasuk says, Hil Hashem HaMelucha. What's Melucha? The kingdom. It says, Keven shechotu Yisrael, we sinned, nitla malchus mehem, v'nasna le'umos ha'olam. Well, the rulership, the dominion over the land was taken from us, given to our enemies. And he says, Kisha Kodesh Baruch Hu Yavir es HaMalchus b'Mitzrayim l'kasdim. God will take the Malchus from Mitzrayim and give it to the Kasdim, to the Chaldeans, to Babel. And the quote, "Umocharti es ha'aretz biyad ra'im," what does this mean? Hamalchus shayeches li. Whose property is this to be transferred? It's God's. It says, it's mine, and I'm going to sell it, give ownership, give provenance. It says the umos ha'olam. Sometimes pamla zeh. This nation this time, this nation that time. And says, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, and he says, Masha Amar biyad ra'im, lo Amar lo ra'im. Why does the extra word yad ra'im? Why does he give it into the hand? He says, and not lo ra'im, to the bad ones, the evil ones. Legalos, to reveal to us, shahamalchus shayeches HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ella shenitenes biyad aputroposin. All of you Daf Yomi guys, what's an apitropos?
They're interim supervisors, like apitropos for your children. You appoint a guardian, an agent.
Guardian.
Guardian.
Would be the best word, right?
I have another word, custodian.
Custodian.
That's right.
Custodian hits it right on the head. Custodian. He says, ra'im, bad custodians. L'machar, he's Yisrael, in Tshuva, Kadosh Baruch Hu, not l'mei Musa Olam, Matzir Alehem, the Yisrael. This is Macharti. Says, you can't sell something you don't own. So God says, I'll transfer ownership to them, to them, to them, to them. You know what? In the end, you deserve it. It'll be yours. I thought it was a very insightful medrash. Now,
By the way, it's got to be like that because there's another Gemara someplace. Hakadosh Baruch Hu does not punish Klal Yisrael and Golas except by a superpower. So therefore, he has to give him a
it's a
lucha.
Gemara in Chagiga, Yud Gimel Amud Beis.
Good.
Why?
Part of it is to
Hashem.
preserve face for us, that we're not just being downtrodden by lackeys, by Bedouins, by terrorists.
No second-rate or third-rate power is going
Exactly.
to beat us. God says, you'll get beaten by the best. Because
Right.
I want everyone to know. And
Right.
was it by the best? It took 3 years to complete that siege.
Right. So Bava was the best. Ashur later, Edom was the best at those times. But once they're done with us, though, they decline. That's the next. I think that's the rest of the Gemara, probably.
So
It fits
Thank you very
precisely with that
much,
Medrash and Esther. Very good. You link up now Gemara Chagiga with a Medrash and Esther. That's beautiful.
So look at this pasuk, Yud Gimel. You want to talk about a total destruction? Komar Hashem Elokim, Habadati, I will utterly destroy Gilulim, their idols. The Hishbati, I will cancel Elilim, Minofinasi, from the highest people, from the president of the land, Eretz Mitzrayim. Below Yehiyeot, idolatry, God. Nesati Yira be'eretz Mitzrayim. I'm taking away your gods. I'm drying up your river. I'm burning your homes. I'm killing you by sword. The piles of dead people, you know what's going to be left in Mitzrayim? Nothing but Yira, fear of God. That to me, you want to talk about a punishment? That's a good punishment. Now, if you notice going further into it, if you go take a look at Pasukim Yud Zayin and Yud Ches, I want to call attention to one thing first. The end of Pasuk Yud Zayin says, Vehena Bashvi Selechna. And then it says in the end of Pasuk Yud Ches, Ubnoseh Bashvi Selechna. The women taken off into captivity. They couldn't protect them. Or they were so busy taking care of themselves, trying to protect themselves from being slaughtered, that the women were easy pickings. Now there's something very fascinating. Look at Pasuk Yud Ches. U this chaf neches, chaf neches choshach. Now, on that, I believe the best parish I had, was, I think, the Mari Caro says, Choshach Mazal Shalahem.
Page.
God, Choshach eclipsed, made dark their mazel. She Gavar Sar Shel Kastim, Hasar Shel Mitzrayim. What are we talking about? Gladiators? Yeah, the Lokahu Milamala. In other words, the two Sarim had a gladiatorial fight in Shemayim. Bayom, Biat Hein Loku Milmata Bayom. What happened up there happened down here. She'ein lecha uma she'ein lo Moshe lemala, no nation who rules below. He says, who doesn't have above an angel on top. You beat the one on top, the same thing happens on the bottom. But the Malbim talks about tach fan ches. He says, if you can think back to Yirmiyah, he says, Sham hoya beis Paro. That was Paro's house. Sham toman Yirmiyahu avonim. Yirmiyahu took stones and he embedded them there. He says, and it says, Kamo shamar b'Yirmiyahu mem gimel, l'chein amar, ki sham choshech hayom. There, the day became night. Mamshil shemin hascholas hamilchama ishil hayom la'arov. When this war against Paro began, it started to get darker and darker and darker. Ad shehigia l'tachbanes, which was the seat of Malchus. Sham hashak hayom legamre. Total eclipse.
Brian,
Total eclipse.
we talked about Tachkanpes. I think that's when we were talking about the Israelite mercenaries were down there and they wanted to, and the Jews wanted to leave to go to Egypt, and the Navi said, you can't go, and they went anyway. And when we were talking about Tachkanpes, I think we were saying, yeah, it was the seat of the king, but their god was the sun god.
Ah,
So when you start
excellent.
saying, so when you say,
Eclipse.
yeah, so if you're talking about the day growing dark, you know, that, you know, we've just annulled their sun god, the Ra.
I'll give you one better, one different. I'm not going to say better. What was Paro's original fear of Klal Yisrael? Why did he institute slavery? Go to the second level. Because they would cover Ein Haaretz. And Hashem covered with his choshech, Ein Haaretz, till it was invisible, till it was choshech. These bakos are revisited again and again.
Balak using the same phrase, I think, in the beginning of Chukah, right? The beginning of Balak. Bechisas ain't similar.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
right.
That phrase, yeah, that's a nice way to analyze the thread for this kind of phraseology.
Now, if you look further, we're going, now we have a dated prophecy. Achas Esrei Shana B'Rishon B'Shivul HaChodesh Hayot Dvar Hashem Elai Leimar. Another prophecy. Listen to this. Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Berada, son of man, Ezroa Paro Melech Mitzrayim. He says, Shavarti. He did? Sure. Paro Necho. Going back. Paro Necho was defeated. When was he defeated? He was defeated at the Har Pras. He tried to defend and he was beaten. Har Pras. And the Hine Lo Chubsha. You have to listen to the poetry. It was not bound up. L'seis refuos, l'sum chitul. He's saying, you want to take care of an injury? He says, before you slap a Band-Aid on it, put some medicine on it. You guys get a scrape, it bleeds. You put some Bacitracin and some Bactine on it. You wash it first. He says, then, he says, you put a Band-Aid on it. He said, but what was he doing? Paro thought he could bandage his army. Could bandage his army without healing it. That's the first yad, the first zroa. But then Hashem says, I'm going to get both of your zroim. I don't know the language, David. Which is the plural of zroa?
Yadayim.
Zroot.
Mm.
Zroot.
Feminine.
Zrosav, yeah.
Moshe, I don't argue with David. David knows Hebrew.
All parts of the body that are pairs are feminine, except for one. Except for one part. Who knows? From Shiur, one in Shir HaShirim. Shnei Shadayich.
And they put in
Better be
masculine.
feminine.
That's feminine. That's masculine. Shnei
Masculine.
Shadayich. Yeah, that's the only pair of the body.
That's right.
What about
Talk
face?
about irony.
That's a paradox,
Say that again.
right?
Hey, I'm not, I didn't make it up.
How do you say testicles?
Well, the common word is beitzim.
It's him.
Sim. I said beitzim. Is that masculine or feminine?
That's a good question. It's beitzah is a feminine word. It's
Good.
probably,
He or stay. You say
It's a
stay,
Geter l'chayim. I love it.
yeah.
So let's wrap it up. So Hashem says, Pasuk Chavbeis, Komar Hashem Elokim, Hineni El Paro. El Paro means Al Paro. I'm all over Paro. It says Melch Mitzrayim, Shavarti Esro Osav. Both of them as a chazakah, the part of his land that's not yet been in a military conflict, yes, Anishberas. The other piece that he's already been defeated on. But why? The paltius acherev miyodo, so he won't even be able to hold the sword.
okay,
Becomes defenseless.
there is a problem with the pasuk. The problem is, he says, first he broke one hand, now he says, Shavarti etzrotav, I'm going to break his hands. But one's already broken. And he even says it. One's broken. So Rashi says he's only breaking the other hand now. And so now both will be broken. That's Rashi's way around it because there's a problem in the pasuk.
Wow.
What?
So it's not a Kulei Alma. It's not a Kulei Alma.
Whatever.
Not all the Farshim agree with that.
It's not,
That's Rashi's take, and it's a great take.
What,
But-
that's so the,
I will give you, he says, I'll give you what the Perish Harid says on it. In your Chumashim, actually your Nevi'im, he says it's on bottom 499. He says, as a chazakah, yes, nishberes, klomar, chazakah, iborim shelo, and he says, nishberes, chalashim shelo. But think back to what the Malbim said. The Malbim said, the pasuk is talking about somebody who slapped the Band-Aid on his army and thought it could go out and do battle. So it was wounded. And he tried to do battle with these figures. I'll hold my sword in the other hand. Maybe the other hand was his left hand. He was a righty. The right hand got schmeiced. Maybe he's a lefty. Since one hand that was schmeiced is totally disabled, now I'll break the other one. That's the way other Mepharshim explain it.
well, yeah, Mitsudo tries to get around it differently. Mitsudo says here, Shavalti ani yeshboret shtei zerotav. I'll break both hands. Et hachazaka shelo nishbara me'az. It wasn't yet broken. V'gam et hanishbaret ashaber od leval yela refuah klal. I'll break it so that it will never be used again.
Irreparable.
However,
Irreparable.
there's a problem with Mitsudot as well, because Mitsudot, unless the nikud that you have here is incorrect, Mitsudot doesn't say eshbor, he says ashaber. We're talking now grammar. Ashaber. Ashaber. Eshbor is break. Ashaber is piel, which is a super
Of course it is.
verb. It's a super, it makes it, I will shatter. So he says, what's basically, you can assume if God breaks the guy's arm first, he's going to break the stronger arm. So he broke his stronger arm. Now he's coming back. He's going to break the weaker arm, but he's going to break the broken arm, which is his stronger arm, but he's going to shatter it. So it'll never be used again. So anyway.
Beautiful. Shkach.
Very good.
Now, going towards the end, I'll tell you a very fascinating thing. It talks about in Bereshis, we talk about the dream, Saramashkim. Dream Saramashkim mentions Kosh Shel Paro 3 times. And the Kosh Shel Paro 3 times talks about the 3 times that Paro will be punished. First time, to leave Mitzrayim. Second time, Nebuchadnezzar. Third time, Kibbutz Goliath. I saw something which surprised me. Says the Ramad Vali, our Makubal. I looked at guidance in all corners. The Makubal says, this is showing you the Rachmanis of the Rabbanu Shalom. What he did was first he shmeised them Mitzrayim, he gave them a chance to do tshuva. He didn't wipe them out. He gave them another chance. Did he do tshuva? No. Wiped them out more, left a little remnant. But like we learned in Yeshayahu, Kibbutz Goliath, flatline, nothing left. So what happens? What happens? He says, "Afitzosias Mitzrayim b'goyim." I'll scatter them among the goyim. The race of aratzos, like seeds. He says, an interesting lashon in pasuk Chaf Daled, v'na'ak na'akos chalol lefanov. That pasuk we had seen before. That refers to the death rattle that comes from the throat of somebody who's dying. And finally, he says, I'll throw you out. You've got no land to go to. It sounds like at the end of this parak, what more can be done? But guess what? There were 2 more prakim dealing with Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, I shudder to think, maybe in a positive way, when finally, the punishment comes to Edom, it says Abarbanel en Edom Ella, it says Romi, Catholic Church, he says. Who knows what the Rebbe has in store for them? If this is what I'm talking about, Mitzrayim, Catholic Church persisted in persecuting us, turning its back when we're being persecuted for centuries. They've got a lot coming to them. So with this, I entertain any questions you may have.
I want to just point out, a Hebrew word, the masculine and feminine usually comes from the singular. And so the plural is not an accurate read of whether it's singular, whether it's masculine or feminine. For example, a word with a vav nun at the end, like chalon, is masculine.
Oh, no.
But it's chalonot, gvohim, which, for example, was a rock group in Israel.
I
Okay.
know that. I know
Okay.
that.
Beitzah is feminine. The hay at the end, it's feminine. But if
Richard,
you go and
listen.
order, if you order an egg in Israel and you want a medium hard-boiled egg, you don't say beitzot kashot, you say beitzah kasha, beitzim kashot. It's still feminine. All
You're
pairs
separating
in
the
the body.
amateurs and the posers.
No, it's just
So, gentlemen, I'm going to tell you again, which Moshe, I don't know that you heard. I was taught over the weekend, we were in DC with my son. There is a method by which I can now put all of my shiurim on YouTube. And so when I get this shiur tonight, I will upload it to YouTube and I'll send you guys links to that, where it'll stay forever.
Yeah, I saw you did it. You did it in one of the chats. Yeah, you mentioned it.
Yeah. And also it will, but everybody reads them. And I will also send you out the direct link from the shiur. Anybody else?
Yeah, where is the tefillah enkat? Where was that? Is that
I think
in?
it's Misaladech.
Yeah, that is
So
where. That is what,
It's in Rosh Hashanah.
yeah, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, whatever. That's probably the word Naka here, no?
Well, how do you translate Misaladeh? I don't know.
No, but I'm just thinking what it is. If it's from this word, you were using it, Na'ak Na'akot Chalal Lefanav.
I'm taking it from the Radak. It says,
Yeah,
Kfar
what-
Parashnu La'el, Perchafav Pasuk Tesvav,
Is the-
Nakat HaChalal, Hu
Yeah.
Hotzaot HaNeshama Ve'akoneh, from the windpipe, the coal base, most
And Kam Misaladeh, isn't it? So are we, is it from our prayers that it's the sounds that we're uttering in our prayers, kind of?
In Kasaladecha, I think that's the phrase you're thinking of. It's in,
Yeah.
I think it's in Mariv, the beginning of Yotzer, am I right? Kippur night. In Kasaladecha.
Yeah. Whatever, okay.
Question is, what does Misaladecha mean? I don't know the meaning.
I don't know what
We
it
should go
means
back to
either.
the
I just
Hebrew
remember the
English
phrase.
Matza.
I think it means it. Okay, Lila to have everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Right. Super standards, set new standards.
Keep me on my toes, Avram. Thank you so much.
I keep you now.
Thank you.
I'm naive. to this
Everybody,
process.
Okay, good
Thank
night.
you, sir.
Thank you.
Lila to-
well,
Night.
Brian, Brian,
yes,
the McRoy's Gedolos,
yeah.
it's not what we want, but take a look at page 956.
9. Oh, you got a map. Okay.
It's not the map we want, but it's in our Yecheskel, it's there. I mean, it's not what we want.
Okay. I'm 958. Let me get to 956. Yeah, is that the map you sent me, Naomi? I think it is.
No, I'm not sending you anything. I'm just saying.
No,
it's
Naomi
not the
sent
map
me.
we
Hold
want.
on.
That's not
Now I'm
what we
taking a
want.
look. It's not the map we want because it doesn't go as far enough. as
It
to
doesn't
say-
go far enough, but the point that I'm making is here in our own safer that we're learning, there's a map and there's other information right afterwards that we probably never even realized it was there.
No,
The next couple of pages have the stuff on the base of Migdash.
Yeah. Trust me. Guys, I want you to know, we have exactly 31. We have 14 more prakim to finish this sefer, which to me is,
shocking.
we're all alive still. Baruch Hashem. May we continue to be.
How many more problems?
Shkach to everybody. A wonderful day.
Brian,
Good night. Thank you.
You're welcome.
have a good night. See you tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem.
Someone
Yirtzeh
turn off,
Hashem.
someone should turn off Marvin's